Okay. Okay. No problem. Yeah. So in 2012, the site was slotted for designation as the Parc Natural des Sources. So it was meant to be a proper Parc Natural along with all of the other Parcs Naturals that we have on the island of Montreal. And that that outlining never really came to fruition. We've had reference to the Parc Natural des Sources, but no funding was really put aside for it. No formal designation of the park. No services ever really appeared on site. And to the best of our understanding, that was largely because the airport of Montreal, which sublets federal land within the borough of Saint Laurent, um, uh, blocked that deal. But I wasn't privy to those exchanges. Those are municipal exchanges that happened over a decade ago. But it's just to contextualize this to say that this has been a fight that we're going into our 11th year, really, since the creation of this Parc Natural Destroy. So has the overarching question of if greenwashing is involved somehow in the profile of the Technopark? Well, I think at its origin, the notion of an eco campus, the eco campus Hubert Reeves, that was the big development project that was meant to go in over the wetland complex in the municipal sector, relied heavily on using nature as a backdrop for a corporate environment. So we have the development plans. You can look at those development plans and see how the marshes were meant to be privileged as a site for office dwellers to be able to look out their windows at. Two-thirds of the marshes were drained in preparation of this development project. A road was put in, thousands of trees were cut down from this wonderfully um, uh, um, this exceptional forest, for lack of a better word, this écoforestier exceptionnel. So we had thousands of mature trees that were cut down, and we had a road that was put in with lights permanently on, interfering with migration, all in preparation for a development that never really came, but that was based, I think, at its heart on a type of ecological legitimacy. And so that's been something that we've been facing the whole time. Even the term eco campus for the municipal sector is something that we come up against. So there's that at the origin of the development project. Now, Hypertech has um, the Hypertech project. We haven't seen the details of their development plan. Specifically, I don't think those have been released yet, but we have had meetings with Hypertech, and we have expressed our deep concern for the project that, from what we understand, is imminent. So trees have been marked. We know there are studies underway. As soon as those studies reveal whether or not it's acceptable for them to build there, they will begin development. So we know this is really quite catastrophic for the integrity of that ecosystem that's in the municipal area in particular, but it's all interrelated. And so the forest section, the marsh section, the grassland section, all of those rely on the premise of non-fragmentation. So that's in terms of greenwashing from Hypertech's perspective, because we don't have the exact development plans, it's hard to say. We do know that there's been an argument that's been offered, and Hypertech is not alone in offering this to us, which is, don't worry, we will compensate. We've had compensation already for the draining of two-thirds of a vibrant wetland, and that compensation is now essentially a dumping basin with dead trees that were planted and not ever tended to, and the diverted water from the drained marshlands continues to feed that kind of dumping basin. So that's one compensation that was offered. We see compensation actively right now, unfortunately, by the airports in Montreal. I don't know how familiar you are with last year's raising of Monarch Fields. It's a separate story, unrelated to Hypertech, but 20 hectares of prime pollinating fields were mowed down during monarch migration period, or right before, actually, so the time that they would be reproducing. And um, and this, of course, outraged many people and many different environmental groups. So the airport of Montreal, we see them compensating now by trying to replant um, common milkweed, which is the sole plant on which the monarch butterfly relies, um, planting that fairly unsuccessfully in different sections of the land that they lease. They have put in honeybees recently, and studies are showing that the introduction of domestic honeybees into spaces where there are actively wild bee populations is quite detrimental to those wild bee populations. So the compensatory mechanisms that some of the companies, be it ADM, as we see tangible proof of, or what Hypertech proposes, these can actually be measures that harm the environment rather than doing any kind of compensation. And we know, according to the hierarchy of conservation, that compensation is the last step. You want to avoid damage. You want to restore whenever possible, regenerate, restore, and compensation is really the last resort. So to see many of these companies going first and foremost towards a kind of logic of compensation for the loss, be it we will compensate for any loss of filled wetlands, et cetera, that's very problematic to us. We know that the compensatory measures that Hypertech has proposed include apparently trees that would go on the roof of their building, exotic species that I think their logic is that might diminish a carbon footprint from transport of exotic fruits such as bananas and um, dates and avocados. That doesn't do much for our nesting birds. Certainly, that's not compensation for the bird population. The ground nesting birds in particular that we have on site, the killdeer, the American woodcock, and others. Um, and we find it very difficult as an organization to see a company that places such a high value publicly on their sustainability profile preparing to build over ecologically valuable land and preparing to fill in wetlands to erect their building. I'm encouraged that there's backlash to this. So we as an organization feel the support of hundreds of scientists that are coming forward to express their concern over the Hypertech project in particular. And we see academic institutions also making statements that suggest that Hypertech is not fitting into the ethos of those institutions. So that's encouraging, but the land has been purchased and the development plans are underway. So I don't know. I don't know what the stopgap mechanisms will be to stop that development from going forward. Yeah, so I think that is part of the logic that we see in many of these authorizations. So the certificat d'autorisation, the environmental certificates that are received that permit building to go forward. Often it's with the requirement that there's some indication of what the compensation will be. So if you fill in wetlands, there's a current environmental authorization that's underway in a separate sector that's very rich, the IPEC sector, and that environmental authorization the title of it is a permit to fill in 5 wetlands. We would think that that kind of permitting in 2023 would not be allowed, but we see that, and part of the filling in will also entail some type of compensation. So yeah, that's absolutely a current practice. Hypertech will do the same. There are at least 4 wetland sites on the property that they've just purchased, and we know that at least part of that is scheduled to go over to be filled in for their development plans, according to what we've been shown. I say that with some circumspection, simply because we don't have a formal document to which to refer, but in our conversations and in the public statements of Hypertech, we know that there is an acknowledgement that should wetlands be affected by the development, then they will be compensating inch for inch, I think was the line of the CEO of Hypertech. So that's of concern to us. We also know it just doesn't make much financial sense for cities and municipalities to be allowing people to asphalt over, companies to asphalt over green space, because we know that there are ecosystemic services that are brought by those spaces to the municipalities. So it's not simply a question of those of us who may have a particular interest, say the birding community in biodiversity, which is the case of Technopark Oiseau. It's also all of those ecosystemic services, carbon capture, the intense heat island in which the Technopark is located in the borough of Saint Laurent. We have a cooling effect that's offered by the site. So it costs actually much more to be regreening mineralized spaces than it does to simply protect those green spaces. And that's not including any of the international commitments that the City of Montreal and the province of Quebec have made toward our targets of protecting 30% of the land for conservation by 2030. So these are all components that feed into why we would encourage Hypertech to build elsewhere. Well, we've been encouraged this week because we have seen the City of Montreal just a few days ago, last night at City Council. In fact, it was brought forward in a two-part regulation, as far as I understand, that will be finalized in August for the formal delimitation of the Parc Natural des Sources. It conspicuously does not include Hypertech land, and that is of deep concern to us. But it does outline over 200 hectares. It is a very promising and ambitious outline of what the park could look like, but it is a statement of intention. It includes private lands that have not been acquired by the city or federal or provincial government. So it is aspirational for the time being, more than a concrete plan for the park. And that also disturbs us because we've seen what happened in the first delimitation of the Parc Natural des Sources, where we did have a plan going forward for a park, and that did not stop the thousands of trees from being cut down and wetlands drained. So that's a very encouraging step, and we were at City Council last night to congratulate the city on taking this ambitious step forward, or making this ambitious promise. But we will only be sighing relief, or having sighs of relief, however we say it, when we actually have the park concretely established um, with it be I'm sorry to fumble my words. We'll only be relieved at the situation and able to fully celebrate when the park is a reality, and not simply a promise that appears on a map. I don't know what the city's stance on hypertech is directly. Hypertech is a is an innovative company that is receiving worldwide awards, notably for its sustainability. And I think it's something that it's a company that Quebec has also supported. So we've had indications of uh, not subsidizations, but support, financial support from both the federal, so Economic Science, Innovation, and Economic Development Canada, which is the federal ministry for this, and the Quebec government. Have supported hypertech's innovations, and from all appearances, hypertech's technology is in fact green technology in many ways. We need, we acknowledge that the carbon footprint of, say, cloud storage, our electronic or digital footprints, these are serious considerations. So Technopark Oiseau is not claiming that hypertech's technology is somehow greenwashed technology. And what we're arguing is that a company cannot go forward in the world relying on uh, its profile of sustainability while building over wetlands. There is just a cognitive dissonance there that shows a real lack of awareness of the value that urban ecology has, and the value that the last of Montreal's sweeping natural green spaces have. So that's our concern. We would find it hypocritical for hypertech to be going into the world stating that it is a wonderfully sustainable company while choosing this site specifically to build on when we know there are other sites. Now the argument is routinely, well, there aren't other places. Yes, there are other places. It's a question of choices that are made, for example, to revamp existing um, buildings that are already mineralized on mineralized surfaces, perhaps choosing not to build directly within this site in Saint Laurent, um, and others. But I know pressures are likely quite great to ensure that hypertech remains in Quebec, and I'm not privy to any of those conversations, but I can imagine the pressures coming to bear. You mentioned CDPQ and the REM before, and we do have a REM station that's right near. I don't know if you're aware of the history of the REM in the area or not, but as a station was chosen, this is the Marie Curie station, and um, that has its own story that's unrelated to hypertech, but it fits in terms of the additional pressures that are coming to bear on the site as a whole. And when the CDPQ started building the REM station, and the site already was problematic for Technopark Oiseau. Technopark Oiseau was succeeded in its early days in having the route of the REM shifted so that it could no longer cut through a marsh where we had arguably our most threatened species, the least bittern, nesting. But it's still, the REM still was slotted and has actually gone through wetlands. So tunneling under the wetlands proved quite difficult. Sinkholes were opened up, our marshes were drained, even though the REM will say there wasn't a correlation between the low levels of water and the sinkholes that opened up with the tunneling. But we know that the ground became quite unstable in places. And so we had really severe effects of ecological effects of that choice to have the REM station there. And we know that the REM station's presence is likely guiding the choice of different companies to be building in the area. It does make the site more attractive for many businesses. We know that there are what we call in French the redevance, so monies that have to be put forward to for any company that's within that radius of a REM station. And so certainly that economic backdrop may indeed inform the decision of different companies to either develop in the area or choose to withhold or hold on to properties rather than permit it to be acquired to by the city, uh, given the presumed economic value of the sector. So in that respect, yes, there is economics kind of working against the conservation of the environment. We always try to highlight um, the argument that ecosystemic services are also economic services, that there is a concrete financial value that comes from protecting these natural spaces, comes in the form of increased health benefits, lower air pollution, in addition to all of those values that a metropolitan area like Montreal has advanced in wanting to preserve its natural green spaces. Mhm. Yes, that's right. So if you look, I don't know if you if you look on a satellite image, you'll see right across from that station, there's a whole wetland complex, and that's what we call the Eco Campus. There is a marsh there that we call Étang Héron. It's not a pond at all, but it's really a vibrant marsh. And we had sinkholes opening up directly within that in that marsh. We had a total of five sinkholes open up, some of which are still fenced off so that um, people who are visiting the site, either for photography or just nature enthusiasts or hikers, um, don't aren't at risk from it. So the situation is not resolved. And our water levels are quite low, we're noticing again this year. So it's still not clear what the impact of that has been on the site as a whole. We do know that the city, in preparation for development, the city in 2017, 2018 came in and drained two-thirds of these wetlands, as I made reference to before. That was in a different administration than our current municipal administration. But the fact remains that choices were very clearly made to privilege development over the environment and to have nature serve as a kind of aesthetically appealing backdrop for businesses that would be settling in the area. And we're still seeing the consequences of that today. And those marshlands and wetlands have yet to be restored. There has yet to be a plan put in place to restore them. So we're hoping that potentially the announcement of the formal delimitation of the park will lead in the direction of restoration. But the two big chunks of the map that are missing are reserved for those private lots that are owned by Hypertech and by another company, FP Innovation, who, for all intents and purposes, have the right to go in and start building. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've seen promise of that with the COP15, the Conference of the Parties on Biodiversity, that was held in Montreal in December. We had Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, expressing his desire to see monarch fields in particular and the federal lands of the technopark adjacent area protected. And that has been done through the strategy, or that it hasn't been done. It's been discussed in light of different biodiversity protections regarding the monarch butterfly. So the hope was that in protecting the monarch butterfly, increased habitat could be protected. And this is, of course, across Canada. It's not simply for the monarch butterfly in Montreal. We are encouraged by that, but that is one species and one type of habitat. So protecting the monarch butterfly and its habitat does not necessarily protect our urban forests or our wetlands where the monarch is less present. So that's one step in the right direction, and we know that there is interest. On the other hand, we have the Minister of Transport, who has who also is a federal um, interlocutor in this, and because the airports are leased by are leased uh, the airport land is leased, the federal land, excuse me, is leased um, by the airport of Montreal. The Minister of Transport in the past has had a very hands-off attitude that's been written specifically in his responses, saying that we we do not interfere with the the ecological practices of the airport. I'm not quoting directly, but I can get you the documentation if you like for those quotes, where he says that management is kept at an arm's length, essentially allowing the airports to do whatever they need to do. And we know that in the the plan directeur for the airports, that the airport of Montreal, that these lots that are on the federal land of ecological value are slotted for commercial and industrial development. So until that uh, plan directeur changes on the part of the airports, we will remain highly vigilant and concerned about those sites, because the government in the past has indicated that it will it will allow a certain autonomy, or I'm probably phrasing it wrong, but there's an autonomy that's being offered to the airports to do what it wishes, and provided that certain environmental studies are done. And we know that the environmental studies that we've seen for development, we had a case of development just 2 years ago with a company called Meltec that wanted to come in and build right on Monarch Fields. The threshold for passing what appears to be an environmental review is actually quite low, unfortunately. So it it doesn't seem to take too much to receive sign off for development, and that's of constant concern to us. So until the plan directeur of the airports changes, until we see that those private lands in the municipal sector have been protected, we're still going to be very vigilant and hoping that both the federal government and the municipal and provincial government can come together. Certainly, it's a question of funding. So we understand that the city itself is unlikely to be able to guarantee financially the creation of this park without additional funding. And because the vast majority of the land in the park is actually federal land, that will require federal support. I'm so sorry for my misstatements. Haven't had enough coffee this morning. I'm sorry. Okay, good. Thank you. I will say that once these spaces have been paved over, they are lost. And we don't have many spaces like this left on the island of Montreal within the greater Communauté Métropolitaine de Montréal. We know that we need every last little green space and natural space that we can preserve in order to meet our international obligations, but it's also for our own health and well-being. Quite selfishly, it's not even for the biodiversity, it's to be able to have access to nature in an urban environment so that the space in which we live is not simply one of asphalt and desolation. Yeah, so the if you I should be able to find that for you. Yeah, I should be able I'll have a link to it. It would be from that was from about 1 year ago now, that statement. Yeah, and we have a slew of documents. We have the whole BOP because there was a BOP that was done for the REM, the ecological studies that were done for the REM. There's a ton of press. If you just kind of Google the technopark, you'll see like technopark or monarch fields or sinkholes. You'll get the whole documentation around the REM sinkholes. The hypertech press has been in the news, obviously, just this past the past 2 weeks, and we hope to remain in the news a little bit for that with some upcoming I mean, this is off record, I guess, but there'll be a statement of